Hi, I'm Mike.
And I'm Joe.
And you're listening to How Many Fingers Am I Holding Up? The podcast. And this week, we're reviewing Detroit.
0 fingers.
Really?
Yeah. I mean, they're bankrupt. The police are killing African American men. It's not a place I'd want to go.
Welcome to How Many Fingers Am I Holding Up? Featuring two guys getting pooped on a stoop and reviewing movies in a weekly podcast form.
And that came to us from Mr. Tony.
Tony Tromador on Facebook. Thank you so much, Tony. If you have any further synonym suggestions, you can hit us up on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Tumblr, Gmail, email, website, links, internet.
It's email.
Wi-Fi, broadband, technology terms, all that. Oh, boy.
Can you tell that it's been a long night and we're
This
not...
is our second episode. It's not even the third episode of the night yet. But this week, we're drinking Brooklyn Box Set, a variety pack of Brooklyn beers. The first of which we'll be consuming is Sriracha Ace. Not to be confused with Sriracha Ace.
All right. Sriracha Ace by Brooklyn Brewery.
I have had this one before. It was part of the reason why I got the Brooklyn Box Set.
Oh, really?
I do like this beer.
Whoa.
Well,
I said a boom, boom, boom. Let me hear you say, well. It's, that's a really interesting flavor. Really strong.
it tastes different from how I remember it.
It's very aggressive in its bizarre taste.
Yeah, I don't know how to, it's a little bit hoppy, a little bit bitter. There's not really much on this bottle to guide me. Here we go. Brooklyn Sriracha Ace is a bright saison built around the unique flavors of its namesake hop. So I guess that's the type of hop is the Sriracha. The Sriracha Ace hop brings a zesty lemongrass aroma and complex citrus flavors, which we matched up with clean malts and playful Belgian yeast. Golden, unfiltered, and crackingly dry, Brooklyn Sriracha Ace glows in the glass and pairs wonderfully with seafood, fresh cheeses, and more. We have none of those.
Yeah.
We've got pizza.
Those are some cheeses.
There's cheese there.
Fresh cheeses. Oh,
but
boy.
Good news is we've got a few more varieties to try tonight. So
we'll let you know how those go as well.
Joe, you want to give me that IMDb description, please?
I would love to.
Detroit.
Amidst the chaos of the Detroit Rebellion, with the city under curfew and as the Michigan National Guard patrolled the streets, 3 young African-American men were murdered at the Algiers Motel.
It's so weird because it's like amidst the chaos, but then it goes to past tense and they were murdered. Like it feels like it should be 3 young African-American men are murdered at the Algiers because we're watching the movie. Anyway, Detroit was directed by Catherine Bigelow, who has most famously directed Point Break, Strange Days, K-19 The Widowmaker, Zero Dark 30, and Best Picture winner The Hurt Locker, for which she won Best Director at the 2009 Academy Awards. And yes, as I said, Best Picture winner. She's the first female director to win Best Director, the 4th to be nominated, and the 2nd American nomination for female director or best director. And she was married to James Cameron from 1989 to 1991, which I only mention not as a sexist side note, but just to note that they were both nominated for best director in 2009 and best picture. Their films were both competing, and she won both of those, and it was really, really satisfying.
She squashed his ass. Yeah.
just because that was obviously for Avatar in 2009
Ugh.
for James Cameron for Best Picture and
Do you remember
Best
when
Director.
I feel like everyone likes to bash Avatar now, but do you remember how like I feel like we were the only ones
Oh, we were in the minority at that point.
like literally I could name a lot of names of people who
I remember.
who have been on this podcast and want to be on this podcast who wanted Avatar to win, and I was just like, what? Like I no doubt enjoyed the 3D experience of Avatar. I wouldn't go beyond that. Like, it was just kind of like, oh wow, that was a ton of fun. Like, kind of like it was a ton of fun and it was a great movie. Like, kind of the way you would come out of like a Disney ride, which ironically it now is a Disney ride.
It's a whole park at Disney.
Yeah, but like when it got serious when it was nominated for Best Picture and Best Cinematography.
You're rolling with the big dogs now.
Yeah, and
You're
then
opening yourself up to a whole new level of criticism.
then I think it was even predicted to win Best Picture, or maybe
It was the front runner for a long time.
or maybe my peers were favorable, and so I think that made the win so much sweeter. Is that
I don't know if I'm misremembering now, but I thought that maybe it was just leading up to it and then he switched at the last minute. But I remember Rope of Silicon at one point predicting Avatar to win Best Picture. Because I feel like we were surprised on the night of Hurt Locker. Like,
we had accepted the fate of Avatar.
yeah.
Watching I
And I
remember
think it had won a bunch of awards that night, like going into,
Leading
and then
up
we got
to
to
it.
the last two of like Best Director and Best Picture. And we're like, fuck, like Avatar's just going to win it. And it's like Catherine Bigelow wins over James Cameron, her ex-husband, and then wins Best Picture for The Hurt Locker as well.
because before that, when they were going through the small technical awards, like James Cameron was just like really
Just sitting back,
Yeah.
like,
he was like, I'm gonna beat that fucking Titanic record. like remember he won like a
14
a
or something like that.
ton of
for
records
Titanic,
for
yeah.
Titanic. And it was so pleasing because I don't think he ever really got to go on stage either.
Yeah, none of them were his directly. Oscars for that.
But James, I think you should make 4 more Avatar films.
Well, Joe, you'll be happy to hear.
I am. I'm filming them all at the same time, and
In the same garage in Hollywood.
what's his name? Oh, fuck. Who played? My God, he's in so many roles, but played George W. Bush in W.
Josh Brolin.
Yeah, there was an article that I shared recently with Mike where James Cameron was texting Josh Brolin and calling him mean names. Like, they wouldn't say what he was calling him, but he was calling him mean, like, vulgar, inappropriate names because Josh Brolin refused to be in, like, the Avatar sequels.
Was he in the first Avatar?
No! He was just... James Cameron is bullying him to try and get Josh Brolin in Avatar sequels, and Josh Brolin's like, no! And he's taking it to a personal level where he's just cyberbullying.
Fucking cocksucker being my Avatar movies. We almost won an Oscar. A Disney theme park. Oh boy. But Detroit was written by Mark Bowl, who is a journalist and screenwriter who's collaborated with Catherine Bigelow before. He's previously written In the Valley of Ella, which is a really great war movie if you haven't seen that. Really underrated from, I'm not sure, I think 2007 or 2008 that came out.
Yeah.
With Tommy Lee Jones. Just a really good, like, understated war movie about going behind the lines in Iraq or Afghanistan looking for a son who goes MIA.
Right.
Really good movie. And then The Hurt Locker, obviously collaboration with Catherine Bigelow, and Zero Dark 30, again with Catherine Bigelow. And then most famously Call of Duty Advanced Warfare.
Best Call of Duty campaign. The one with Kevin Spacey, the one in the future. It's the best Call of Duty campaign. I'm sorry. Great job. He did a great job on that.
That's the one Call of Duty I didn't get.
It has a great campaign. The multiplayer is garbage. Garbage.
It's like, it's in the future. It's advanced warfare, right?
It's
It's just interesting that they didn't like get him for like modern warfare when it's like hyper realistic. Like,
I think he was just like, it was just far enough from the Hurt Locker, where he was kind of like, yeah, I got fucking time to do this. And like, I don't know.
But Mark Boal is an Academy Award winner. He won Best Original Screenplay for Hurt Locker, and he was nominated for Zero Dark 30, but did not win. And then he won Best Picture for Hurt Locker, again, because he was a producer on that film, and was, again, nominated for Zero Dark 30, but did not win for that film. Detroit stars John Boyega, Will Poulter, Al G. Smith, Jacob Latimore, Jason Mitchell, Hannah Murray, Caitlin Dever, Jack Rayner, Ben O'Toole, John Krasinski, or Jim from The Office, Anthony Mackie, Joseph David Jones. Oh, and Anthony Mackie was in Hurt Locker too, so that's a reunion of sorts. Ephraim Sykes, Leon Thomas III, who is Andre Harris from the show Victorious on Nickelodeon. Nathan Davis Jr., Peyton Alex Smith, and Malcolm David Kelly, who is Walt from the show Lost. Just kind of cool to see him in like an older role now, because he was like a kid star on Lost.
I never watched Lost.
And then Gabenga Akinagbe, I'm sorry if I butchered that, who was Chris Partlow on The Wire way back in the day. So there's a lot of like familiar faces in this movie that was kind of cool.
Yeah. I did recognize quite a few people in here. Where did John Krasinski come from, though?
Where do I know him from?
No, but like it was just kind of like, why was it's just bizarre casting?
I mean, why was he cast in 13 Hours?
I mean, that's what I'm saying is like, did they see were they like, let's check out some other Middle East based modern war post 9/11 movies, and they were like, wow, we really like what you did, John, in 13 Hours.
Now we're
the
gonna put you
Michael
in
Bay
Detroit.
movie.
Yeah. And then I should have written down which one. I think it's Ephraim Sykes is in Compton, Straight Outta Compton. He's Easy, I think, in that movie.
Okay.
He's much better in this than he is in Straight Outta Compton.
Right, yeah.
But yeah, that's about all I got for Mike notes. We can get into discussion of the movie at large, Detroit by Catherine Bigelow.
All right. I know this particular batch of reviews that we're doing, I know, I really thought like January was a dry spell, but I feel like what we're going through now, when is it? It's like, I guess it's late August. Yeah, it's like late August. There's really a dry spell, and especially the kind of time constraint that we had to see it, where there's a ton of like really great indie films kind of coming out now. You never really know when or where they're going to be released. There's a ton I want to see right now, but I don't have access to them. Maybe when my movie pass comes through.
If Regal doesn't ban it. Yeah, we haven't talked about that on the podcast yet.
I do.
Movie Pass lowering their Movie Pass. I don't know what they call
the application website service. Who the CEO is either previously from Netflix. I don't know.
An original or a co-founder of Netflix.
Okay.
And is now doing Movie Pass.
But yeah,
he's just trying to fuck up theaters any way he can.
It really.
He hates movie theaters.
Well, I mean, from AMC's standpoint, but I feel like this is really has the potential to resurrect theaters.
Oh yeah, I don't really understand where. For those who don't know what we're talking about, Movie Pass is this application that I just found out about because it made viral news for a little bit because they lowered their application price from like $30 a month to $9.99 a month. And basically you pay this monthly fee and you can go see one movie per day for the entire month for just that monthly fee.
Right.
So you pay $9.99 and you can go see 30 movies on that. And essentially they give you this debit card that they're paying the movie theaters for all these movies.
They're fronting the price for your $9.99.
They've said that their market plan is essentially to kind of bite the bullet on all these profits of people going to see. I think they're expecting people are not going to see 30 movies a day. Like even me, like someone who goes to see a lot of movies, am going to see like 5 at most in a month probably.
Right.
So they're going to lose money on that, but their plan is to essentially sell your data to movie theaters and anyone really who is interested in who and what age and
Marketing
what type of
companies,
people are
yeah.
going to see movies and what are they going to see and when do they see them, and just a lot of useful information that they can sell at some point later.
Whatever, Facebook already fucking does that to us. So I'm more than willing to. But what Mike was referencing was that AMC has recently been like, no, fam, we ain't doing this no more, kind of. I mean, I think they were okay with it when it was a $30 price point, but I think they see the influx of, this was announced on Tuesday or Wednesday, and now today's Sunday. I wasn't able to get into the MoviePass website or app until yesterday, Saturday. So that's like 3 or 4 days of the site being crashed. Like, that's how popular this service is going to be. And I think AMC saw the wave coming and they were like, we're going to get our legal team to stop us from being any part of this.
Well, I think they're already in a contract with MoviePass. And I think what they're saying is that they're not going to renew, I guess, when that contract is up. Or try to get out of the contract they're already in. But as of right now, they are under contract.
Okay,
so
yeah.
I guess AMC does still have to honor if you take a movie pass there, because
Good.
Again, previously it was $30 for this pass, which again I don't know why AMC cares, because Movie Pass is paying these theaters no matter what.
MoviePass is fronting the bill for
like it's not like you're handing them a Movie Pass membership card and they're like, oh, okay, you don't have to pay. You're handing them a debit card that Movie Pass is paying for these movies that you're going to see. So I'm not sure how AMC is. I mean, there must be something that they're able to see. I mean, they're the number one movie retailer or whatever movie chain in the United States. So there must be something that they can see from their vantage point of this can't be good for us somehow. In
their statement, they said analytically, we don't think like this business proposition or this new tactic of lowering the price by a third is going to work out, and we don't want to be a part of like this failure kind of.
Unless maybe their idea is that like if people are looking at Movie Pass as like, oh, I pay $10 and I see like 4 or 5 movies a month, as opposed to not having Movie Pass and going just to AMC. Like, it makes AMC's prices look bad. Like, if you're paying $10 for like 4 movies, which is like probably like the most people will go to see a movie in a month, like unless you're like a really crazy average. I mean, that's the most of like major movies that are released in a month is like 8 maybe at most.
I think AMC even has a program though where you pay like X amount of dollars and you can see as many movies as you want.
Do they? Because I haven't heard about that.
Yeah, I think a few like bigger theaters have programs like that, but they're not as good of a price as Movie Pass.
I'm not sure that AMC does, because I think I would have heard about it because I have their like gold premiere status like membership thing.
Right. It's something
and you pay a certain amount a year, and then you get, after every amount spent, you get like a $5 coupon towards your next purchase, and you get like upgrades on drinks and stuff like that.
It's definitely worth researching. An article that I read when this first came out, or when the AMC official statement first came out, referenced some sort of program that AMC already had, along with like a bunch of other reasons of like, why would you not want this? Like, where it's like movie theaters
I'm
only.
pissed at AMC for not telling me as a gold premiere member about that.
Right, and I mean, it's also like, I don't think individual movie theaters or like movie theaters actually make money through ticket prices. I think it's only like concession stand sales, and if you have more people there, wouldn't there be more concession stand sales? Or it's like a whole
the article
thing.
that I had read was pointing out that like if people are paying less for the tickets because they're using Movie Pass, there's more money freed up in their wallet for that weekend to be like, oh, since this is like the 5th movie I'm seeing this month for $10 a month, like I can go buy like a slushie or something. At, like,
I can get a popcorn the other 4 times I see a movie. Yeah. This is why. I mean, we'll get back into Detroit. I do think
we'll talk about Detroit eventually.
I do think one of these upcoming batches of episodes that we record, I would like to do some sort of new kind of segment, like once a month, where we talk about sort of outside stuff.
I feel like we just gotta do that naturally anyway.
Yeah, I know. It could make these movie conversations shorter, and we could go more at length with these other sort of like personal or real world, or again, especially as Oscar season approaches, and there's just, there's going to be a lot of stuff to talk about. But let us know if that'd be something you'd be interested in. I also threw around the idea of that being live, but I don't know how that would work in podcast.
Would you guys watch us
format.
live? And would it have to be Facebook or YouTube or
I feel like we'd
Twitch?
have to do Facebook and YouTube or something if we had like both our laptops going or both our phones going at once. But again, it's kind of like, how do microphones work in that whole... I don't know. That's something that we should figure out behind the scenes.
How do cameras work?
Guys,
Comment in the comments below.
you guys understand live broadcasting on social media websites. Message me at... But let's talk about Detroit.
Yes. So, all right. I walked in a little bit late. I couldn't have been more than like a minute or a half
Okay.
later. I walked in
I don't think you missed
as the cops are putting people in like a...
paddy wagon.
Yeah, I don't know if that's the actual term, but that's what I was about to call it. Yes, a paddy wagon.
I don't know what else it would be called.
Just a prisoner transport of some kind.
I'm trying to think of what happened
I've read that there's like a whole intro of paintings by somebody trying to explain.
I was not a fan of that.
Really, a lot of the reviews
Yeah.
I read were really into that.
It felt like, I don't know how to explain. It was like really like, it was kind of like, it looked like it was kind of like cut out of like like copy and pasted out of the documentary, like the 13th or whatever, or 13th about the, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It was just kind of like all like, again, yeah, I didn't know they were like paintings or whatever, but it looked like very storybook-ish or like picture book-esque, like kind of children's book kind of like illustrations almost, or kind of, I don't know, that
I'll
might...
see if I can look it up.
that
It's
might-
supposed to be a famous painter.
Right, and that might be me bastardizing some sort of famous African-American artist, but it did not fit the tone of the movie for me at all. And all of the information that they cover is basically like African Americans essentially were brought here as slaves and yada yada yada, in the history of essentially African Americans in this country. And I thought maybe that was a little inappropriate, or not inappropriate, but it was kind of like, if you're covering this information and somebody doesn't know like that African Americans were slaves in this country, they just might not understand the nuances of racism between police and African Americans in the 1960s. Like, it was just kind of like, it was really basic information that had like, it was too all-encompassing of kind of like, this is how racism works in America.
It's,
like, I don't know.
Jacob Lawrence's acclaimed series on the Great Migration. That's the animated sequence.
Yeah, and again, I didn't really... It's just like that kind of stuff is implied. Like, even if you hear something like the Great Migration, it's kind of like you're kind of reaching outwards past this like very focused event. It's one night in a hotel. I don't think you need a foreword that says, you know, back when we first shipped slaves to America from the continent
I do
Africa.
think there's
yeah.
things that needed more exposition in this film, and it's not necessarily that we as viewers didn't understand those things, but the presentation almost skipped over them too much. Like the thing that I'll just jump to right away is just like, in that beginning, like they have the scene that I walked in on where they're loading everyone. I guess it was from an after hours club that was illegal during that time.
They were having some sort of...
There's exposition that, from what I've understood, has not been gone into in this movie, is where a lot of bars wouldn't serve African American people at this time, and there's just not a lot of places for African Americans to go to have a drink during this time, so they had to resort to these sort of illegal after hours clubs to go have a drink for any kind of celebration. And then they get thrown into this wagon, and then immediately someone just comes out with like a Molotov cocktail and starts throwing it. It's like, we don't really get the context, as far as I can tell, of like this is kind of like a boiling pot that's just now boiling over. It makes it appear from this movie, even though they have the animated sequence, as if it's just kind of like, oh, like these guys had like a bad night and now they're going to start looting and rioting and like be opportunists. And it doesn't really fully encompass, even though we, I think as like a more intelligent audience, know that outside of the movie doesn't put that in the movie, if that makes sense.
Right. I feel like I'm underselling this sort of animated intro. Again, I don't think it's appropriate at all. I don't, like, it's kind of like we just reviewed The Dark Tower last week, where it's kind of like, only a child's mind can bring down the Dark Tower. Like, it doesn't help me at all. Like, explain, just like this didn't help me. At the very, very end of like this kind of like forward, they say like, you know, in Philadelphia, Newark, and somewhere else, and Detroit, African Americans were sort of banned to these very small cities, you know, where they could live or whatever, and that was about it. I mean, but
and a lot of the reviews that I've read that were negative go into how they didn't really do even a good job in exposition of that, whereas that it's like after sort of the emancipation, all that, a lot of people, African Americans, fled from the South, like the openly racist South, to these northern cities. What do they call them? Just these northern cities that they're hoping would be sort of like a,
right,
you know, somewhere where they could find like a new life, and they were really just finding racism in kind of like a new form up there, where people were closet racist, or more subtly racist in different ways. And again, that's something that Detroit, that seems like something that would be good in the exposition of Detroit to like, and maybe that comes across in the Great Migration paintings. I haven't seen them, so I can't totally comment on that.
It was just, it's a really like bright, colorful, jungle-esque landscape in these paintings. I don't know. It's something with that, and it's something with like you're having to read text. It's totally, I don't know. It almost, I don't know. It didn't fit in this movie for me. And honestly, it didn't provide, even though it does provide kind of that, you know, they fled to these northern cities or whatever. I don't know. But anyway, this whole paddy wagon scene, what's happening inside this hotel or some sort of a rec room reception area, they're having a sort of welcome home from the war event for this one or two veterans. Like, I don't know if you catch this scene, but as they're putting people into the paddy wagon, an elder black guy puts his arm around two like young guys who just came back from the war, and he says, "Welcome home, fellas." You know, kind of.
I think that's literally when I walked in.
Yeah, and so I think that it's a party for them, and it also shows kind of this early sort of John Boyega character. It doesn't show John Boyega, but it shows almost like an older version of what he would be, and it's this African American guy working with the police who comes in, and he has undercover guys in there who it's like this whole setup thing. But yeah, I don't know. There is a lot of this movie there's a lot of reaction to this movie that takes place outside of this movie. I feel like when this movie was first announced to being made, there was definitely some pushback regarding Catherine Bigelow and Mark Bolt making this film. Like this, like a lot of people said, this story is ripe for like a black director to tell, and this is not your story to tell, white people. And I don't know. And ironically, I think that's something that one of these characters deals with later, like at the very end of the film. It's kind of like, should white people be profiting off of this kind of thing? You know, it should. And again, that's ironically, like, it's kind of like a lot of people are like, should Catherine Bigelow and Mark Bold be profiting off of this story of black struggle, kind of? And, you know, commenting as somebody who doesn't have a stake in this fight, really. I mean, I'm glad this movie exists rather than not existing. It's sorry, I'm gonna go on a small tear though, but it's definitely a conundrum though, where we talked about 3 episodes ago in The Big Sick, where not a lot of people of color get the chance to tell their story through the medium of filmmaking. So what you have is this entire industry almost made up of entirely white males who are open to criticism no matter what they do. It's either you're telling a story that isn't yours or you're not being inclusive enough. And you either have like an all-white cast or you're appropriating our culture kind of thing through the use of, even like a token character kind of. And this isn't to say that, pushback isn't coming from a justified place. We're almost 2 years out from fucking like hashtag Oscars so white, and we haven't seen like a lot of change. I don't know. I hope I articulated that without sounding like a fucking tiki torch khaki wearing white motherfucker supremacist. This film in general in America and film in general has like a lengthy history of underrepresenting and misrepresenting people of color.
No, I think it's a valid discussion that needs to be had, because I do think you're right. There are instances where it's kind of like, what is someone supposed to do in that situation?
Right.
But I think with a movie like this, it's somewhat more obvious that it's kind of like, this was not your movie to make.
Yeah.
And they're Mark Boal and Catherine Bigelow are obviously very talented filmmakers. Like Zero Dark 30 is a fucking incredible movie. Hurt Locker is an incredible movie. In the Valley of Ella is a great movie. Even going back to like Point Break, like Catherine Bigelow, like obviously knows what she's doing. Behind the camera, behind the scenes.
Right.
But a movie like this takes an understanding that I don't know that a white person is able to bring to such a sensitive situation like that. And a lot of my complaints about this movie, I think, really stem from it being a movie made by a white director and a white screenwriter.
There's a lot of problematic scenes in this movie.
Yeah. And we'll get into some of that later. I do want to say that I think a lot of the beginning of this movie is pretty captivating, because I had read a lot of reviews going into this and I was kind of prepared to hate it a little bit, just because I read a lot of reviews. I'll actually read some quotes from those now that I thought were great. A.O. Scott for the New York Times wrote, "It is curious that a movie set against a backdrop of black resistance and rebellion, however inchoate and self-destructive its expression may have been, should become a tale of black helplessness and passivity, and the white men, the decent ones as much as the brutes, have the answers, the power, the agency." And then Alexander Nazarian for Newsweek wrote, "What's missing from Bigelow's film is not sensitivity but nuance. Her characters never come alive, moving through the film less as people than entries in a sociology textbook. It's an especially striking shortcoming because Bigelow was so good in both The Hurt Locker and Zero Dark 30 at intensely engrossing deconstructions of people far outside her experience. If Bigelow could get inside the minds of soldiers suffocated by post-traumatic stress disorder, as she did so capably in The Hurt Locker, she can get into the mind of anyone. In Zero Dark 30, she made even CIA interrogators likable. The characters in Detroit, though, black and white, are as flat as the plains of the upper Midwest." So like these are the reviews that I'm looking at coming into this movie, and I'm kind of expecting like it to be this really tone deaf, completely like just awful white movie about a black experience, really.
Hidden Figures. Yeah.
Although it was a black filmmaker for Hidden Figures, wasn't it? Theodore Melfi.
Yeah, that's very true. It was not a great movie, though.
No,
it was just, I don't know.
But I do think that some of their great filmmaking does shine through in the moments where the sensitivity is maybe not as required yet, or it's something that's easier to translate to the screen as someone that hasn't really experienced those things yet. Like I do really love the scene of the three cops riding around in the beginning.
Oh yeah.
And they're trying to be heroes. They're talking about like taking the city back. Like I think that really gives us a sense of what these cops are like in this situation. It doesn't in the scene tied to that where Will Poulter shoots the fleeing looter, and then he gets back to the police station and the detective is sort of scolding him, and he's kind of like, well, I don't understand like what I did wrong here. Like it's a scene that doesn't humanize that character. It doesn't forgive that character, but it does help us understand him in the sense where it's like he doesn't realize that what he's doing is wrong. Like he's not he's a monster, but he's a monster who doesn't know that he's a monster in a sense, and that's something that helps us understand him and his character. And I think that's what the scene with the cops kind of riding around in the car.
I also didn't completely understand that film. I mean, understand that scene.
The detective scene, or
the scene where they're riding around and then Will Poulter shoots at the looter. I think definitely one of my favorite performances in this movie is Will Poulter. He does a great job. This might be a breakout role for him if this movie is big enough to be considered that. I think he was even supposed to be like Pennywise in the new It movie or whatever.
Was he, or does he just look like the guy that's Pennywise?
No, I don't know. I think he was in early talks to be. I don't know. But the way that we're introduced to him is one of the first confusing parts of this movie. And I don't know if it's something I missed or misread, but he has this like fucking McNulty-esque monologue about how as a system we're failing these people and we need to do better. And then like right after that, he jumps out of the car and like blows like 2 shotgun loads like into this guy's back who's looting groceries because the entire town is shut down basically. And I mean, he kills him, he murders him. And he eventually also becomes like this terrible villain. And I didn't understand that monologue really that he delivers of
the way I took it was that it's trying to, again, not humanize these characters but help us understand him. And I think what they're trying to help us understand is that he thinks he's doing the right thing.
Right.
And that's sort of why when we get to like the actual incident at the Algiers motel, I think this movie sort of goes off the rails. Like I think we're heading in a good direction in terms of, again, not humanizing racists, but helping us understand like, oh, this is the type of fucked up they are. Where it was similar to, I compare this movie a lot to Loving in comparing and contrasting in many ways. Whereas in Loving, you had that sheriff who thought that he was like doing the right thing by being like, it's unnatural for you to be with that woman. And he thought that he was, doing like God's work, so to speak, in those scenes. And he wasn't necessarily like incredibly violent or anything like that. He thought he had a better understanding of the way things were supposed to be. And it wasn't like this evil horror movie racism that we sort of get in the second half of this movie. That's why I think the first movie is a little more nuanced in that it's, again, it's not humanizing these racists, but it's like this is where that sort of racism comes from. It comes from this false sense of duty and this sort of horrible misunderstanding of the place of certain people in society.
He does, I don't know, it just like in that car, he seems like the least racist, most passive kind of dude in the car. And then jumps, and I mean, maybe they're using action to tell who he actually is, but like through dialogue.
When he has the scene in the detective's office, he doesn't even really seem scared. He's just kind of like waiting there,
right?
And he's like kind of confused when the detective's like, "Yeah, there's probably going to be charges coming." He's kind of like, "Okay, all right, are we done here?" Like. He doesn't really understand that he's done something wrong. Like he says the one line to the detective, like, well, how am I supposed to stop him from like getting away? Like,
right? Yeah. I also didn't completely understand the relationship between him and his superior, who basically reams him out after murdering somebody, and his superior literally says like, "I'm going to recommend murder charges."
I don't know if it's a superior. I think it's just a homicide detective.
Oh, okay.
Who's investigating that homicide.
Gotcha. And he says like, "You're suspended." And everything kind of goes back to normal. I mean, I guess because they're in the midst of this riot and they need all hands on deck. Like, that's why he doesn't like pull him off the streets immediately. But
one of the reviews I read put it as like, at this time, like bad police are better than no police. Like in the midst of like a Detroit riot. And I think that's what they were trying to get across. Did he actually say you're suspended? I couldn't remember.
Yeah, he says you're suspended. I'm going to recommend murder charges, but then he also says, like, take it easy out there, man. Like, he's kind of like, chill out there, kind of. And then, I don't know. And that's why, like, after the big event, which this movie is really just kind of like, I don't know, I'll get into that, but like after the big event that happens during this movie, I thought like he was really fucked, kind of, and he's visually nervous, and I don't know. We'll get into that later.
I do have theories about that. I think that itself is handled all right, although I still do not like the way the actual event is handled. But just talking more about like the beginning of the movie, like again, I'm captivated by these scenes with the cops, and then I feel like I could watch like an entire movie about the dramatics. Like I thought that was like really captivating in this movie in the beginning. Like all those characters.
It was really well acted and really well written.
The behind the scenes of like trying to get on stage. Like I would have liked a whole movie about the dramatics during like the Detroit riots and then the aftermath after that. But I feel like some of the stuff in like the prologue of this movie is almost too much. Like the movie does kind of go on for like a really long time.
The movie's a little too long for my taste.
The whole incident ends, and then we have like 3 or 4 different like prologue scenes. But some of the reviews I was reading were complaining, and I do kind of agree that there's so many scenes of black horror and black misery in this movie, and not enough scenes of black people enjoying life and just, you know, what is sort of the life that they're trying to get back to and save in this movie. And we don't really have a lot of that. And I think the dramatics is a step in the right direction, these scenes. Like I was just really engrossed with these characters, like the friendship between Fred and Larry in this I thought was really, really interesting and captivating. Like I just liked seeing them flirting with people at the Algiers, and you know, Fred like teasing, or Larry teasing Fred about like being a virgin and having to like fix that problem and stuff like that. Like it was interesting, and it wasn't sort of like exploitative like the way that the actual incident is in this movie.
What I was going to say earlier is to talk about this movie in a more of a broad sense. And I feel like I can only really look at this movie in a broad sense at times. I mean, I can just definitely discuss the details, but this feels like a movie where it's more from the outside looking in. But this movie does feel a little bit too long. I feel like they could have made it a little more leaner, kind of. But this movie, and why I keep referring to like the one part of it as one scene, because it feels like this movie is one big scene with like an entire movie bookending it, kind of, you know, and it's very strange. I don't know.
And I thought it has really good pacing before that, and like I really like a lot of the stuff of them trying to sort of set the stage for this incident that's about to happen. Like I did really like the one scene where there's the little girl in the room and she goes to look out the window, and the National Guardsmen down below assume that she's a sniper, and they open fire on her. And like that's something that ends up being directly correlated to what we're gonna get into with the Algiers motel incident that they get into.
And I don't think that's even something that was dramatized. I think that's the only thing in this movie that I've definitely heard of happening.
And it's not done in a really heavy-handed way. It's just a quick scene of like, you know, this is the type of thing that led to what we're about to get into at the Algiers motel incident.
And it's like, before we get into the scene, the first 20 minutes of this film, again, it's a little bizarre because it's almost like a documentary. I mean, that's kind of Catherine Bigelow's shtick, is that like a lot of these movies are kind of shot in like this kind of way. But the structure of this film goes against like everything in film, where we don't meet any main characters for like the first 20 minutes. It's just these atmospheric shots, in a sense, of just things happening to other people.
Is Anthony Mackie one of the veterans in the beginning? I couldn't remember.
I don't think so. But I don't know. I don't think so, but I don't know. I don't know. There was some like guy around me who said like something And it wasn't, I can't remember exactly what it was, like, and it was at the beginning of, like, these kind of scenes in the movie theater. It just reminded me of just sort of like, you know, the first 20 minutes is us watching the people of Detroit who are essentially destroying Detroit through riotous behavior. You know, and it's like watching this film and watching riots in the news in 2016, 2017, you can't help but ask yourself, like, why are they destroying their own community? And, like, he asks something like that. And then I feel like later in the film, it almost answers that question. I mean, maybe it's a little, like, maybe it's just something that I saw, or just spoke to me. And I don't think we should do, like, spoiler alerts. This is just history, but an African-American man essentially shoots at the National Guard and police from his hotel window, essentially inciting the entire event that the film is based on. And I feel like that scene is no different from, like, throwing, like, Molotov cocktails and burning down, like, fucking, like, local businesses in Detroit. It's, like, in communities... Like, the whole premise is, like, in communities that have no power, the one thing you can take control of is what's around you. You know, it's like, it makes you feel like you can do something. Like that guy
in that scene that itself, right before that, when he uses the starter pistol on his friend, like, they have this whole kind of, like, fake play that they're sort of going through.
Yes.
Of, like, him pretending to be a police officer pointing a gun at African American. It's like the way you have to sort of tiptoe around that, and they're sort of setting the stage for this way of, like you're saying, like, yeah, like him sort of causing that reaction of them freaking out about the starter pistol is, like, the one thing he, like, can control, and, like, much in the way that, like, throwing a Molotov cocktail at a building and it exploding is the one thing you do have, like, control over in situations like that. It's trying to get some modicum of control over a situation.
Right, it is, because, I mean, you have these, you know, the two guys, the singer and his friend.
Larry and Fred, yeah.
Larry and Fred, you know, are kind of picking up these white girls, and then the white girls are like, we're hungry, and we know these guys who make food, and they're like, yeah, we can eat, and they go up there, and they're kind of pissed off that these guys are with these girls, kind of, and again, that's them taking control of the situation, you know, after one of them, Frank, I guess, is making out with one of the girls or whatever, and they do start this sort of theatrical display of, like, this is what it's like to be a fucking black guy, you know, or this is what it's like to be of our race. And, yeah, and I do feel like he's so high on that moment of getting everyone riled up that he takes it, like, you know, a step further by shooting at the fucking National Guard. But yeah, it's what I'm trying to get across is that I feel like the Molotov cocktails are not the last time we see some sort of act like that. There are varying degrees of that in this movie from both black and white people, you know? People who are just fucking trying to take control of, like, a situation. And, you know, yeah. I don't know. I feel like this...
I'm going to pause it right here, Dan. I got to use the bathroom real bad.
Go for it.
Quick bathroom break. We'll be right back. And we're back. After a wonderful excursion, courtesy of beer.
I've made my way into the second beer. It's called Brooklyn Pilsner.
Thoughts?
It's a beer. It's
Does it have, I think the Sriracha. Oh yeah, the Sriracha Ace is 7.2%. So that's actually pretty.
That's pretty strong. The Pilsner. I don't know if it says what it is.
5.1%.
Okay, that's pretty normal. Yeah, it's very smooth. I don't think it's my favorite Pilsner, but it's pretty smooth. Yeah. I don't know.
It's a beer.
But I feel like this review I know we're just dropping back into a place where we don't really remember where we're going.
I think we were just about to get into the actual incident.
But
We were talking about Carl Cooper firing the starter's pistol at the National Guardsmen as like a way of pulling back some sense of control.
Yeah.
And you were saying the other characters, even some of the white ones, the entire movie is them trying to have some sense of control. I think that's where we left off.
Yeah, I don't know. I was just thinking, this is kind of like similar to Dunkirk.
In what way?
In the sense that I didn't really know about this. Did you know about this event going into it? Or did you use this movie as
I knew
a way...
that there were riots in Detroit, or as they call it, rebellions in this movie. I didn't know about the Algiers Motel specifically. I had heard the phrase the Algiers Motel before.
I'd never even heard the phrase Algiers
There's a lot of stuff that happens in this Algiers Motel sequence, like specifically that sequence that I was kind of like, that can't be true. Like it seems overly stylized. When you do look up what actually happened, or at least what was testified in court to have happened, that is sort of what comes across in this movie. Although I do think that it is a little over dramatized to a certain extent.
Yeah, I'll definitely get into that while we're covering the event. But just the way that it's similar to Dunkirk is obviously it's a very tense film. It's a film that I use the movie in a way to inform myself about the event. And it's kind of also this, like, people are trapped in a small space with the odds, like, kind of closing in around them. I don't know. And it's basically, it's structured like a conventional thriller. But let's get into the actual event that takes place.
And it's I'm conflicted about this because I like a lot of this movie, but almost everything I like is not what the movie's actually about.
Okay.
Like everything that really has to do with like the Algiers Motel incident, I really don't like in this movie. And that's really what they set out to make a movie about the Algiers Motel incident.
I'm interested to know what you don't like about it. Not that I have like any...
I think that the rest of the movie is sort of painting this broad-stroked picture of what Detroit is like. We're getting a lot of different characters, a lot of different voices, and we're getting a little bit of slice of life from all these characters as well. You know, that's why we get to see the scenes of the dramatics. We get to see, you know, people partying at the Algiers, how other people are hanging out. We get some of the scenes of the cops, and we get to know all these characters just a little bit before shit actually goes down at the Algiers. And then when shit really goes down, it turns into like a horror movie, like a real life horror movie that's still a little bit over the top. And we kind of just, all black people in this movie from that point forward, lose all voice in this movie. And I know that's how that incident took place, but it's still a little weird when it's a white director and a white screenwriter making this movie. And it just feels like a movie that they shouldn't have made and maybe shouldn't have been made at all. Like, I don't know that this is a story that's ripe for filmmaking, because inherent to the story is this true story of black people basically being held at gunpoint for however many hours in the Algiers Motel and not being allowed to talk, not having any agency, not having any voice, and just kind of being terrorized in these horrible ways for hours. And then there's not really a happy ending or any kind of salvation in the end.
At some point, this big scene becomes torture porn, and I didn't like that.
Nope.
There's also, especially because, you know, his involvement in one of the biggest film franchises in the world, John Boyega, such a confusing kind of... He has a really great performance in this film. It's just kind of like what I said about what's his name,
Will Poulter.
Yeah, Will Poulter. John Boyega has a fantastic performance, one of the best performances in this film, and is a really interesting character. But they never really do anything with him, And he actually does get like an arc, like a full arc, but the way they present this really interesting they present this really interesting character, and then they don't explore it at all, besides like at the end he's ashamed of how it all worked out, you know, like where he is this kind of not respected by black people and not respected by white people. He's kind of caught in the middle, like, you know, he has black people calling him like Uncle Tom, and he has white people who are law enforcement who are kind of like thinking of him as a junior, or just kind of like they'll use him when they need him. But I think it could have been explored further, because it's the most interesting character in this movie.
It's a weird casting, because I feel like the casting is too big for the role. Like, he does a great job with what is there in the role, but just by the nature of having John Boyega, who just came off of The Force Awakens, like, you're expecting this to be like the main character of the movie, and I don't think it really is.
And that's how kind of advertise it too.
It's not really the main character of this story either. Like, and I don't know if they cast.
And they spend a little too much time on him, right?
Force Awakens, but I mean, I can't imagine they cast him before he was cast in Force Awakens, and they would have known that was going to be a huge jumping off point. Like, you can't not predict Force Awakens to be a turning point in anybody's career.
And he does. I mean, this entire event, during this entire event, he has, like, he is able to perform how, like, what's in the script or whatever. But I don't think we really get a standout performance from him until, like, literally that one small scene that they keep using in the trailer, where they bring him, like, out of his job and into an interrogation room and kind of trying to pin the murderers within that hotel on him. And then you can really hear it in his voice, where he's like, what? Like, kind of like, it's this guy who's in their back pocket, and then they're like, well, you carry a whatever caliber gun, don't you? And he's like, yeah, but I don't, you know, like, I didn't do this. And it's a really, like, I don't know, it's a really powerful shift in his voice, but it was almost too late to save for me, because I'm like, they're not doing anything with this super interesting character.
In the, like, third or fourth prologue that they do after that scene, they don't do anything with that either. Whereas they don't have any scene that is like, I know we're late in the review, but we're jumping late in the story as well.
Right.
They don't have a scene where they shift from, like, oh, he's not on trial anymore, now he's a witness in the trial for these cops. Like, it goes from, like, they show him, like, behind bars, and they have the one interrogation scene before that where they're like, you know, we do these in, like, a couple stages. The first stage is witnesses, the second stage is suspects. What stage are we on now? Oh, you don't know, we're on the suspect stage now. And they're, like, kind of playing these mind games and being like, you know, we're gonna fucking, like, get you for this shit, essentially.
And they're not, like, the racist cops either.
No.
And I've also, after watching this movie, I was reading that this character is the most disputed in the movie from, like, actual historians, which would also kind of make a lot of sense, because I just, like, didn't understand his motive during a lot of this movie. It seemed inhuman at times.
I got that he was, like, acting in self-preservation. You know, like, and I think they try to establish that in his character, like, in the beginning when he goes to bring the coffee to the National Guardsmen.
I understood that scene. Yeah,
I want to let them know I'm here. I don't want to get shot tonight. And I think a lot of the other scenes are scenes where he maybe could have done something, but maybe because he's a black security guard, he doesn't think that he has, you know, sort of the range to do something without putting his life in danger, you know, around these obviously very racist white cops with guns who are acting very violently. Like, he doesn't think that he has maybe the ability to actually save anybody in these situations, and he sort of just does the best that he thinks that he can in those situations.
I also don't know if, perhaps I'm misremembering, but I didn't understand the bridge between him bringing the police coffee and him going to the hotel, kind of.
I think he was still talking with the cops.
when they were under fire.
They were under fire.
Okay.
And then he went back to the store. They locked everything down.
Uh-huh.
And then I think he went to go check out what was happening at the Algiers. Like, that's when he's, like, sneaking around the back and he comes
Right.
in.
Ugh, it just seems like such a bad idea. It just seems like even from his perspective, where he's the lower your head, work 2 jobs kind of guy, it doesn't seem like he'd leave his post that far. Where, like, it seems reasonable for him to leave his post and go serve them coffee and get on their good side, so they know we're not the looters, kind of. But to follow them to the front line of, to follow the fucking National Guard to the front line of what's happening, it just seems bizarre. I mean, I understand
that's
he has
maybe
to
like
get there somehow.
It's
But
a sense of duty to, you know, he wants to help them out. He knows the area. The National Guardsmen are just called in to the
Right.
area. So he's maybe just trying to help them out.
Definitely.
And again, it's hard, like, you can't question some of the stuff in this because it is just being pulled right from the case files and the testimony. But then there's stuff that happens, like, within the Algiers that, like, again, some of it is testified to, but it's also been counter-testified, and, like, nothing was officially proven, a lot of this stuff. And, like, I know that a lot of it probably has to lean against the cops, and in favor of obviously the victims in this case. Who are the ones that have something to... The cops are the ones that have something to preserve in terms of by lying about what actually happened here. But I feel like they maybe go too far into villainizing these cops to the point where they become not relatable, and then through that, less scary.
Yeah.
Like, they become almost cartoonish in their racism and their evil in this movie.
Yeah.
Like the scene where they're interrogating everybody, they're having them stand against the wall, and then Will Poulter, who in the beginning of the movie, again, not humanized, not relatable in the sense that, like, oh, I can relate to that, but understandable in the sense that you can see how someone could be racist in that way, or you can sort of have a greater picture, a better understanding of their racism, even though not relating to it. And then they kind of throw that all out the window in this whole Algiers incident, because they have the one scene where they're all against the wall and he's just kind of like, well, I guess everybody better start praying now. And it's literally a scene out of like a horror movie where he's like pointing guns at people and, like, threatening to kill them if they don't pray. And the one Fred guy is, like, trying to sing, and it's like sort of discordant against, like, the soundtrack that's going on at that point. I mean, I don't even know if there is a soundtrack, but it just sounds very, like,
doesn't fit the...
Yeah, it's frightening, everything that's going on at that point. And I do know that what it was testified that he did force people to pray.
Right.
But I feel like there was one review that I read that put it more eloquently than I'm going to put it now, but it's just kind of like the entire Algiers incident sequence of this movie is just kind of like a lot of, like, the black people screaming and crying and, like, praying, and it's like we don't get them talking at all, and it's almost to the point of, like, you can't even really let your head think because there's just so much, like, it's just like a constant horror for, like, the last, like, hour and a half of this movie. Essentially, it feels like is maybe only like a half hour, 45 minutes, this actual sequence. I'm not actually sure. It's a long time though, in the grand scheme of this movie. But it just goes through this sort of, like, unrelatable is the wrong word. I'm trying to think of what the right word, because it's not that we would relate to racism, but we can't put a face to it because we can't picture someone being that evil. Whereas, like, I think like I said before, I think movies like Loving did it very well.
Yeah.
And again, it's a movie that's directed by and written and directed by a white writer director, Jeff Nichols.
Right, that's true. Yeah.
But done effectively because it's showing sort of the white racism that maybe we can understand and relate to. Again, relate is not the right word, but put a face to, of someone who thinks they're doing the right thing, but they're so horribly misguided in their beliefs that they're doing these awful, evil things.
Right.
And it doesn't need to be to the level of, like, sticking a gun in the back of someone's head and telling them to, like, pray over some gun that you're not even sure is there.
Yeah, and in Loving, the racism in a way almost feels parental, like kind of like you're like kind of like, oh, no, like it needs to be this way, like you don't understand it now,
They
but
think they know something better.
And in this it's just straight up, I don't know, there's there's so many changes in tunes.
It acts against what
too.
they've established in the first half of this movie, which is again like this Will Poulter character being like, I didn't know I was doing something wrong.
Right.
And then when this whole Algiers incident goes down, like it's pretty hard to make a case for him not knowing that what he was doing was wrong, because it's so torturous and just like they're playing like these games that they know are like just cruel and unusual against these like people. It doesn't seem like good police tactics. Like when the looter is running away, he has this sort of police reasoning of like, if I don't shoot him, he's gonna get away, and how do we stop him? And that's sort of his like justification for that. Whereas in this, I don't know what like the police justification is for the kind of behavior that
you can't get into his head and know why he's doing them.
And then it gets worse because this movie has a little bit of a problem with like the white savior complex in this.
There's a big problem.
Whereas
with
like they show racism, and again, this is why I like the first half of the movie, is because I think it shows sort of ordinary white people being racist. And then it goes in the Algiers incident sequence to there's these three cops who are incredibly like evil incarnate essentially in this scene. Like it's a fucking horror movie, the things they're doing to these people. Like you can't imagine anybody doing that to anybody.
Right.
And then there's a bunch of other shades of sort of evil of like white people who are not that bad in terms of that they're not actively doing anything, but they're passively letting things happen. Like the state police who are like, yeah, let's leave this up to them. Like, this is, I don't like what's going on here.
I think that, and they walk away. That's like the National Guard who are like, these people have civil rights. He's like, I just don't want to be fucking involved with this anymore. You know? Yeah.
And then, and when the National Guardsman walks away, he's like, this seems like police business. Like, we're going to leave. Like, you don't need our help anymore. And then, I mean, you do have like the two white girls in this situation. Like, again, part of this might just be like a product of the actual times and like what was testified to actually happen in this incident. But they're the only two people that really get a chance to speak out against the police off. Like none of the other black people held hostage in this situation have a chance to be like, what you're doing is fucking wrong. Like this is not right.
Yeah.
But the white girls get the chance to kind of be like, it's 2000 or it's 1963 or whatever they say it is. Like, you know, and they're kind of like, they do this all the time in like movies about race where they just throw these white characters in that are
time traveling white people.
Time traveling. They have like no idea of it. Like they're completely like surprised by racism existing in the 60s for some reason.
Yeah.
Like,
and I'm gonna jump around in this movie just because I know we're late in this review and get out a lot of what I'm feeling, but I really hated a lot of these sort of like audience wish fulfillment scenes where like, for example, there's like nice guy cop who, you know, saving the day for the one guy like running from the hotel like after the event has happened, and he like takes him and he's like, who would do this to a person? And like that line like hurt me, and then he says, don't worry, I'm gonna help you, brother. Like, not an ER, but he goes, brother? And I was like, oh, no! And it felt very like, hashtag, not all police! You know, like, even in that time, like, you know, I don't want to go too on a tear with things I didn't like about this movie, because there is so much of it that I did like, but the structure of the cop who takes the guys into the hotel, like, so they're taking a lot of these young black guys into different rooms of the hotel and, you know, quote unquote interrogating them, and then they'll kind of like shoot into a wall. They'll like blast like a shotgun into a wall and just be like, if you know it's good for you, fucking lay on the ground and stay silent. And, you know, pretend that you're dead for your friends out there, so they'll get even more fucking freaked out. And there's this one cop who takes one of them into a room and actually shoots them, and it was like really distasteful. It felt more like a comedic kind of punchline.
And again,
then it felt horrific.
that is something that actually happened or was testified to happen in court.
But I don't know.
Because they talk about it in the court scene. They call it like the game, and that was what it was actually called in actual court. Was this game of taking them into the room, making everyone else think that they had killed them, and then supposedly that did happen, where the one cop thought they were actually killing someone and killed them. But yeah, that scene did make me feel like sick to my stomach.
It's something. It felt like a comedic punchline. Then it actually felt like horrific, like it should have been. It's something about the whole like dumb cop, smart cop dynamic. The way that the guy who dies is killed off screen. Like it's all kind of part of this like almost like punchline-y like way that he's killed, and it's like kind of like the audience knows, but like the people in like the movie don't know, and it's kind of like building up to like a big laugh almost. It was just like it fucked with my mind, that whole scene. I was just kind of like, what is going on?
For the script that is there, which is not the greatest script in these Algiers incident, to my opinion. But for the script that's there, I think that's like ingenious casting on that dumb cop's part, because he just has this like look in his eye, like nobody's home,
right?
Nothing's like, he just looks fucking stupid,
right? Yeah.
It's genius casting for that part that they were trying to get across in this movie, even though I think they maybe should have not gotten across that type of point. But what they were trying to get across, it's great casting, because he like kills him and he's just kind of like, oh, you guys weren't killing them. Oh, I feel sick now. Like,
but it just seems something more like...
He has this like dead stare when he looks at him, and he's like, yeah, I've never done that before. I've never killed someone before. And it's sickening to a point that like should not be. Like it's not a good...
But nobody's...
It's
I
evil.
feel like nobody's actually that stupid, though. It just felt like
again,
weird.
it happened in real life, but I feel like they really play it up how stupid they wanted him to be in this movie.
It does, and I feel like...
And again, it's to the effect of like where the other two cops are maybe so evil that it's like, I can't find a real face to put this to in the real world. So it almost... This is what I was trying to get to with like the white savior complex of this movie, is that like they separate the guilt of this whole situation in Detroit and the Algiers motel by pinning it on these three cops who are so evil that, like, again, like that scene that you pointed out, like, who could do such a thing to a person? That is like kind of like separating the guilt from white people and cops and the entire system that actually allowed this thing to happen, and saying, oh, it was these three bad apples that really allowed this entire situation to happen, and it's their fault because these rather than the fault of the entire system, that sort of, the system that let someone shoot someone a couple hours and then go back out on the street like policing without any real like reprimanding and stuff like that.
Right.
So you have like these two really evil guys. It's like, oh, it's so evil that I can't really find a way to relate to them or put a face to them or understand them in any way. And then you have the dumb guy who's like so dumb that like I can't find a way to imagine a cop being that dumb in the real world.
Yeah. I don't know. This is my last tear I want to go on. I mean, we can probably get to reviewing soon, just because it's been a while. But it's been a while since I've been. But I feel like the death of that guy. Sorry, I'm burping. But I feel like the death of that guy, and then the other guy at the end of this event, where he's letting them go as long as they kind of agree, like, I don't see anything here, or I'm not going to remember anything here, and the whole kind of play into like the clever dialogue of like, again, I don't see anything here. I feel like, even though they did happen, like, I feel like those were the dramatized portions.
They don't know what happened. That scene specifically, they don't know what happened to how Fred got killed.
Who's Fred?
Fred's the one who says, like,
Oh, okay.
What are you talking about? I see a dead
Right.
body. You killed
Right.
him. You fucking killed Carl
They
Cooper.
don't know what happened to him?
I mean, they know he was dead, and obviously the assumption is that obviously he probably was. But just because Fred or Larry left, there was no other witnesses there when Fred was killed. So
Exactly.
they don't know exactly how Fred died.
And that makes the most sense because, you know, like, I feel like Mark Bull, the writer, had to get to a certain number of dead bodies, and the court transcripts of an unjust trial, wasn't cluing him into how everyone died exactly. So he kind of thought he'd, put in something to motivate the police to get out of there, and then leave a little line of dialogue, so they could kind of like leave the scene on. I don't know. It is a powerful scene to cut out of the event on. Like, it's kind of like, I don't see anything here. Gunshot. Next scene, kind of. It's powerful as opposed to kind of the dramatic where, like, I don't know, yeah, even if it is in the court documents, I feel like something like, oh, this one dumb cop was included into the game that we were playing, and it does show the irresponsibility of what's happening inside this hotel. And I mean, as a writer, Mark Bull has to kind of dramatize a lot of these events. And again, at the end of the movie, they do say, like, there's only so much we can do with the court transcripts of an unjust trial. It's kind of like
that inclusion of that little thing at the end, because that just says to me, like, don't make this movie. Like, you don't
exactly. Yeah.
Not all stories have to be told. We didn't know enough. Like, we can assume enough, and I don't mean to say this like in defense of the cops, but I think because of them taking too much of the side of the victims in this case, it had the opposite effect, because they went too hard against the cops to the point that we can't find any like real life corollaries for them, and it has no effect on, because I don't look at this scene of the Algiers motel and go, oh, we better be careful about cops now.
Yeah.
I think, oh, we better be careful about these three fucking incredibly bad apples from this incident that, like, I can never imagine ever happening again. And it's less effective than movies like Loving, where you take a more subtle approach to racism and show that ordinary fucking people that you know in your everyday life, who are upstanding citizens, who you trust, who are pillars of the community, can be fucking racist and have fucking backward ass beliefs about race in America. And they don't have to be like these fucking horror movie villains.
It's
like
it's kind of like the fucking like whole next scene. Will Poulter and the two other cops, like, kind of sweating it out, being reamed out by their superior or detective or whoever's on this scene, and like Will Poulter even being chased down in the parking lot and being called, like, you racist fuck, like, like by another detective or superior. It's kind of like,
again,
we don't know if that happened.
Another
it's
white
just
savior
kind of
complex.
It's yeah.
I did like that scene just because of the way that it contrasts with the first scene where he shoots the looter running away, and he sits patiently in the detective's office, just kind of waiting for whatever happens, not really thinking that he's going to be in any kind of trouble. He's kind of surprised when he's like, I'm going to be recommending charges, and he's kind of like, okay, is that all? Can I go? Like, he's confused by it. And then in this scene, it's like he's adapted from that situation where he's like, the system maybe is not set out to protect me in the way that I thought it was, so I have to be careful. In that first scene, he tells the truth according to what happened. The guy was running away, and he fired a couple shots at him. And then in the scene at the end, he has an alibi prepared. He's got all these lies prepared. They're messing with evidence and stuff. He tries to run away at some point, and it's kind of like, in the beginning, we were showing this picture of racism, of it's something that's so ingrained in society that people don't even see it as wrong, and that they're not, they don't think they're being monsters. They think that they're doing their duty as police officers, and that's what's fucked up about it. And then this shitty situation happens so bad that even he knows that he's bad. So he's like, I have to come up with an alibi. We have to get out of this. Like, they know that they were fucking wrong in that Algiers incident in it. So I do like that scene, the way that it contrasts, but again, just I don't know that this movie needed to be made. I don't know that it should have been made by Catherine Bigelow and Mark Bowl. It just seems like there's something missing here that I don't think that we really have the right to fill in dramatically.
Right.
And I also do think there's ways that we could have gotten around that. Like, I think with that scene with Fred getting killed, like, would it have been so wrong to just follow Larry as he leaves? Because we have Larry's testimony, so we know what he sees up into the cops saying, like, you don't see this body here.
Yep.
And he's like, I don't, I leave. Could we have not have just had, like,
Just
a gunshot? I mean, he might have heard the gunshot as he's leaving, and then we can just kind of fill in our minds, like,
Right.
you know, Fred wasn't willing to, because they had 2 or 3 that walked out in that way where they were like, do you see this body? And they're like, what body? And they leave. So I don't know. I don't think it's the most responsible screenplay we've seen.
No, and it felt, and I mean, it's exactly like I said before, where it feels like a tally mark of kind of like, well, I need this many dead bodies, and we can kind of space, deaths out accordingly, to get the thrills, or there's like this kind of like martyr, like, we can, and then we can end the scene with like a martyr, and that'll say a lot about, the blacks. It feels so like unnatural and weird to see, like, to know that like a guy wasn't like, you know what, you can kill me right now because I don't want to stand for what's going to happen here in history. Looking back in 2017, like, it was such bullshit because, like, in that night, you're doing, and like, it's like John Boyega's line, it's like, you just need to fucking survive this night. It doesn't matter what's happening here. You just need to survive this night. And I highly doubt somebody's like, you know what, you can kill me right now, put a fucking bullet through my chest. Like, it fucking makes my blood boil, like, thinking about some of that
Although
shit.
I do think that it was well acted on.
Oh, definitely, right.
The guy who played Fred's part. I wish I remembered his name right now. For what he's given in that scene, because he doesn't really play it out like you're acting it out like now, like the, you can fucking kill me. He plays it out like it's almost like a misinterpretation of what they're asking, but also an act of defiance of like, no, I'm not gonna like shut up, because he's kind of like, what are you talking about? Like, there's a dead body right there. You fucking killed him. And he's very, like, distraught and anxious in that scene. And he's not really... It's like a weird type of confidence where he's...
He's a martyr, though. He plays it out like a martyr, though. Like, I don't... There's no misunderstanding. He's very... There's a dead body in front of me. If that's how we're going to play this game and you let everybody else go that way, I'm not going to go the way that the other guys went. There's a dead body right in front of me, and if that's his fate, it should be mine. Like, I think it's a martyr in the bravest way, but I think they're hoisting this great responsibility upon, I don't know, it's inhuman. It
would be great if we knew that happened.
Yes, right. And I know for a fact that the cop was like, we had like this like verbal agreement that he could have agreed to, and he like looked me right in the eye and he was like, no, I'm gonna go narc on you, kind of like like, it's kind of like no cop would ever, like, no racist fucking murderer cop would ever be like, and he was really stoic and heroic, and he was just a great guy, and I had to shoot him for that, kind of. Like, it would never play out like that.
Oh, in the movie, it plays like he's like crying, and he can like almost barely get the words out as he's trying to say it. He's not like calm and collected during that scene.
Right, but it's fictitious.
Right. Yeah.
What happens? Yeah. But yeah, that's pretty much. I think I'm ready to score it up. If you're ready to score it up, do you have any?
Just the only part we didn't touch on is like sort of the epilogues of this movie. I think I've been saying prologues at the beginning. Epilogues is what I mean about the closing chapters of this movie. Where
I think you said it right. Yeah.
I'm pretty sure I said prologues earlier, and that's not what I meant.
I missed it. Yeah.
The epilogues, but the the whole like Algiers incident ends, and then we have this sort of, again, there's too many characters in this movie is one of my other complaints. Like, and I know there's a lot of characters in this story and people involved in this story, which just brings me back to not every story needs to be told, or not every story needs to be told in this format. You know, maybe there's a TV series to be made out of the Algiers incident, or maybe there's a longer 3-hour Broadway play to be made out of the incident. It doesn't necessarily have to be a 2-hour movie, because there's a lot to fit in here trying to get all the characters that are involved in this. Like, my head wanted to fucking spin around when John Krasinski gets introduced in like the last like epilogue of this movie, and it's like, do we need another recognizable actor at this fucking point? Like,
he's not even that good either. He's almost
he's
just
too likable of a person.
Yeah.
He just looks like, you just look at him, you just think like, oh, Jim from The Office, while he's this lawyer who's defending like racist cops.
He's not Nick Kroll in Loving, which I was okay. Yeah. I was okay with that. You know, it was kind of like, yeah.
Although Nick Kroll he's playing against type a little bit, I guess, because sometimes he's kind of not the villain, but like the unlikable character. But John Krasinski's just so likable as a face. Like,
right.
He just looks like soft and baby-like, and you're just
he
like,
doesn't look like
Jim.
He's from that time either.
Yeah, he doesn't play well in period movies. I feel like I saw him in something else as a period movie. But yeah, and then they have the scene with the guy who plays Chris Partlow from The Wire as what's the guy's name? Aubrey's dad. And that's just kind of like a whole other unnecessary thing that's sort of just dragging this movie out for a while.
Yeah.
Like, maybe scenes like that would have been okay if the Algiers incident is a little bit smaller. Maybe if we had introduced these characters earlier in the movie. Like, maybe if we didn't focus on the bar scene with all the people getting thrown in the paddy wagon in the beginning, and maybe had done some character development for some of these other characters that you wanted to come back to later in the movie.
Right.
That might have made more sense. And then, as much as I liked the dramatic stuff in the beginning of the movie, I wasn't a fan of some of the dramatic storyline towards the end of the movie. I don't know if that's just because I was not checked out, but like not sold on this movie because of how they handled the horror of the actual incident. I was just not really invested in this movie towards the end. So when they started doing the whole like turning down the record contract, and it just felt like unnecessary to the plot at that point. Especially because we had been focusing on so many characters. Like, if this had been a main character movie, and you make Larry Reed the main character, and you start off with Larry Reed in the dramatics, we get more of his life in the beginning as a musician, get a better understanding of him. Then we see the whole Algiers motel incident through his eyes, and then you can have the epilogue of this movie be him sort of making the decision to leave the dramatics, which has to be a very hard decision, him not wanting to make music that white people are going to dance to after this type of incident. Like, that's something that's certainly ripe for cinema, but it just feels sort of extraneous to the story at this point in the movie.
This movie is exhausting because you have like we talked about, like this entire 20 minutes at the beginning of the film with no characters. It's just kind of this dramatized documentary, and then we have this enormous scene, and many things in between those two things too, where they're kind of these developing characters, and then after this scene, you're fucking really drained. It's a lot to take in. And then the movie asks you to be like, do you got 40 more minutes? And it's really like,
do you have a courtroom drama left in you?
Right, yeah. And that's what it is like, where it's a movie that's bookended by two different other movies, It really, after the scene, it really loses its pacing, and it ultimately stumbles in a way that allows it, like, that doesn't allow it to really wrap up the movie the way that it should be. I don't know. It's really difficult. Like, after everything after the scene.
I read a review that was talking about how they thought that the end of the movie sort of missed an opportunity, because in real life there was this whole thing where the real court case wrapped up and they obviously get this unsatisfactory verdict of...
Mm-hmm.
Is it the camera or is that just
And that's just the display.
But the display's still on.
I don't know. Let me check.
I'll try to talk through these technical difficulties, but did you say I'm not Jordan?
I need to be in this
thing. So in real life, we have this sort of the real court case ends. They get this verdict that they're not satisfied with, obviously, of not guilty for all three cops in that situation. And then apparently there was, I don't know, I can't remember what the correct term for it is. It's not a civil trial, and it's not a mock trial, but it's sort of like a blend of those two things. Where like, is it still going?
I don't think so.
Oh. All right, you'll miss the last 5 minutes of this. Sorry, guys, watching on video. Or I'll cut in the GoPro footage.
Right, yeah.
They did this sort of thing where they held a trial at this church where they hired real lawyers. They presented the real evidence that was presented in the trial, and they had either a present judge or a former judge sit in, and they basically were trying to have a trial, even though the results obviously wouldn't mean anything, just to see, what would an impartial and unbiased, set of jurors and lawmakers actually come to a decision about the evidence presented in this trial.
Mm-hmm.
And they did this whole thing at this church over a couple of weeks, and the result obviously came back as guilty for these cops. And the review that I was reading was stating that, wouldn't that be an opportunity to sort of throw that at the end of this movie rather than this like depressing court case for like 40 minutes that's just kind of like... And again, they kind of just take us on this weird journey where like the movie ends, we have the father of Aubrey like going through his like state of like denial,
mm-hmm.
which is cinematic in some ways, but it also just doesn't fit in the arc of this movie. And it's just leading us down this weird path that doesn't really get resolved in any way later. And then we have the courtrooms, or no, even before the courtroom scenes, we have them looking into John Boyega as a suspect,
right.
which they don't explain to us when they shift over to the cops as the real suspects.
Right.
And then we have the trial with the cops, and we don't really follow up with John Boyega later, besides him like puking after the verdict is read. And it's after, I guess, Will Poulter's character is like, no, you're a pretty okay guy.
There is no follow up to him being the...
We don't even... Well, yeah. I wish we had seen him on the stand, and I don't think, to my knowledge, I don't think we see him on the stand at all.
No.
So we don't get to see whether he says the right thing about what happened in this incident or not.
Right, yeah.
And I don't know if that's the filmmakers trying to protect him because he didn't. Maybe he opted not to testify, or he didn't actually tell the truth about what happened,
mm-hmm.
or what the filmmakers believe happened at the Algiers motel incident. So then we go through that, and then we have this even further thing of like, which is even really more depressing, of like Larry Reed leaving the Dramatics, them experiencing success and signing to this record deal, and him like struggling to survive in this like apartment without any like heat, and he's going to like churches just looking for a job, and he's willing to take like a job as like a choir director,
mm-hmm.
even though like the music guy there is like, you could like go to a bunch of clubs somewhere and like make a lot more money there. Why don't you go apply there? And he's like, I don't want to play music for those people.
Right.
And we just kind of go down a bunch of paths that I feel like were really unnecessary for like the end of this movie.
Oh, definitely, yeah.
After like 2 hours of runtime at that point. We don't come to any kind of closure, or even really like, I don't feel like any of these epilogue scenes do anything to help us form an opinion about what really happened,
mm-hmm.
or to help us understand these characters in any further way.
Yeah.
Like maybe the dramatic stuff would have if we didn't have like 3 or 4 other epilogues before that we're trying to force to go through.
Right.
and other characters that were like, oh, this is the one we're supposed to care about now. Oh, and then we care about this guy and then this guy. And then John Krasinski's here from The Office, and we have to look at his face now for 20 minutes. It's just a lot. But yeah, we can get into reviews now.
All right.
Let me find that Rotten Tomatoes. On Rotten Tomatoes, the film has an approval rating of 83% based on 166 reviews, with an average rating of 7.5 out of 10. The site's critical consensus reads, Detroit delivers a gut-wrenching and essential dramatization of a tragic chapter from America's past that draws distressing parallels to the present. Words.
I think I can go first because I really don't have a lot to say. I think a lot of what I wanted to say, I said during the review. It was nice that Catherine Bigelow and Mark Bowl have given us two of the most important post 9/11 films, both Zero Dark 30 and The Hurt Locker. Even Zero Dark 30, it wasn't crazy about. The first hour really wasn't interesting to me. But it really, that movie even displays how Catherine Bigelow can build tension in a great way, in the second half, which is all almost real time. It's nice that the two of them, again, I will return to the point that I'm glad this movie exists than it doesn't exist at all. I'm glad these two made a movie about the war at home instead of the war abroad. That's something that's important to me. I think this movie should have been made. I'm glad it was made. I don't know. And it is. I think I said some slightly controversial things at the beginning of this episode about sort of people of color not being able to make, what they want to make. Just because of this shitty fucking film industry, and it is kind of like these white filmmakers. And even though, 90% of the filmmakers in the American industry of filmmaking are male, and Catherine Bigelow is a female, and she is a minority to some respect, this isn't really her minority, that she can tell the story of. But yeah, I feel like everything I wanted to say I have left in the review. I think I'm gonna give it a 3 fingers out of 5 fingers.
Oh boy, I gotta come to a decision.
It was, this is really hard. This is a really difficult film to give a rating to.
There's parts of this that I think are really great.
It is
filmmaking, and I mainly point to the first half. Part of that is maybe just shell shock coming from that Newsweek review and the New York Times review, where I was expecting this just to be a completely insensitive piece of filmmaking, and I think the first third of this movie is pretty sensitive and pretty on the nose of how you should make or set up the first third of this movie. I thought I got a pretty clear picture, aside from the really quick jump to oh, here's black people throwing Molotov cocktails and looting and rioting and stuff like that. But part of that is also somewhat the responsibility of the viewer to come to a movie with somewhat of an understanding of these aren't just opportunists. This is the language of the unheard, or whatever that Martin Luther King quote is that I just butchered right there.
Right.
But I do think there is a level of insensitivity that is displayed here in the Algiers motel incident sequence of this movie. It's a little exploitative in the way that it's portrayed like a horror movie. I don't think it's really their horror movie to tell. I think we already had a great horror movie about racism in Get Out that was handled with much more nuance and sort of showing the horrors of sort of woke liberals and woke white people without having to go to the degree of 3 awful fucking cops who are gonna sit people down and put a gun to their head and tell them to pray and strip white girls down. for having the nerve to be in the same room as a black person and, holding a black guy at gunpoint and doubting whether he was a veteran or not because he couldn't have possibly done that. It just goes to degrees that even if it is true in real life, I don't think this was their film to make. I don't think they had the understanding of how I think black people needed more voice in this movie, and black characters needed more voice in this movie, especially during that Algiers motel incident. And again, like, I sort of come back to, if you couldn't make a movie to have any kind of humanity from the black people in those scenes, then maybe it's not a movie that should be made. Like,
right.
or a movie, a story that's not fit for the theatrical movie format, and is a story that needs to be told in another way. I know it was already a book, and maybe that's the best that can really come out of a story like this, where we have these conflicting courtroom testimonies. There's a lot that has to be sort of made up in your head about what actually went down during these sort of pockets of when we can't confirm what actually happened because either testimony is conflicting or we don't have testimony about that pocket of time. Like the time when Fred gets killed in this movie, we don't really know what happened there because there's no one there besides the cops, who obviously aren't going to tell the full story.
Right.
And all the witnesses have fled at that point. And then I think the epilogue just goes on too long. It doesn't really handle things the correct way. I think I'm going to give it 2.5 fingers.
All right.
I wanted to go higher just because of how much I liked the first third of this movie. But then there were parts during the middle third where I was just like, I can't believe I'm fucking watching this right now. Like, it almost felt like a joke at points.
Yeah.
It just went too far in certain directions, to almost having the opposite effect of what I think the filmmakers wanted to do. I think they wanted to show the horrors of society and the horrors of certainly society in Detroit and police in the 60s. But I think they went so far to the point that they end up sort of vilifying society and only villainizing these 3 cops and just saying, here's 3 bad apples and 3 bad people, and it seems like the rest of us are pretty okay because that one cop was there and said who could do such a thing, and the National Guardsman said this is police business and didn't want to be a part of it, and the state police walked away, and John Boyega tried to do the right thing. So yeah, I'll give it 2.5 fingers.
Okay.
I wanted to go higher. I did want to like this movie.
I completely understand. This is a very, I don't know. It's a difficult movie.
It is, and I'm a fan of Catherine Bigelow's. I really do like Zero Dark 30 a lot.
Yeah,
almost more than The Hurt Locker, which I obviously liked a whole lot. I just think Zero Dark 30 is a more effective movie, and it's a difficult topic too because you're talking about torture, and there are a lot of scenes in that movie that I think people interpret as being like pro-torture, but it's kind of just showing relatable people doing unrelatable things and sort of being willing to go to these extremes, and they're maybe not even okay with it, but it's just something they're sort of, because of their circumstances, being forced to do or have to choose to do in those circumstances. And I thought the movie handled that really well, and I thought she would be able to handle sensitive subject material like this well, but it's probably not the type of sensitive subject material that she should have touched.
Right, yeah, definitely.
But I do think I heard her and Mark Boal are collaborating on 2 more projects. One is based on the nonfiction book that I didn't write down. It's something about a serial killer in Texas or something like that, and then a Bo Bergdahl biopic they're working on.
That'd be definitely interesting. More interesting than Serial Season 2. Which wasn't interesting at all to me.
I liked Serial Season 2.
It was kind of like a Middle East documentary.
It was really just a documentary about the war in Iraq.
Right. Which I thought was like 3 years too late.
But if you have seen Detroit and you agree or disagree, please leave a comment below on SoundCloud, YouTube, wherever you're listening, or wherever you want to get in contact with us. We're on Twitter, we're on Facebook, we're on Instagram, Tumblr. shoot us a Gmail. We'll read your comments in the next episode if you feel so inclined. And let me just run through these links and get out of here so we can get to our third episode, because believe it or not, this is our second episode. We still have one more to go.
It's 1 a.m., ladies and gentlemen.
Pray for us. HowManyFingersPodcast.com, as always, for pretty much all of our links. You'll find a link to our iTunes. You can rate us, you can review us, you can subscribe to us on there. You'll find a link to our mailing list. You can subscribe to that. You'll get notifications and emails whenever we do shit, like post an episode or do cool stuff like get accepted to a podcast festival. Just general podcast news. You can subscribe to our YouTube. You'll find out when we post new videos, and you'll get us closer to getting our own unique URL on YouTube. As always, we've got merch, t-shirts, koozies, stickers, and all three in a package deal for $11.99. We're pointing into the camera that's not on right now. I'll point it to the GoPro in case. All that at howmanyfingerspodcast.bigcartel.com. And on our website, as always, there's a Amazon link and an iTunes link. If you click on either, anything you purchase within the next 24 hours within each respective platform, we'll get a nice cut of. It's an easy way to support the podcast without going too far out of your way. That's about it. And tune in next week for our review of
For anybody wondering, I also drank Brooklyn's Orange Peel Pale Ale. It was pretty good.
Naranjito. I'll try that next in between episodes as I.
It was. I think this was my favorite of the three. But until next week, I'm Mike.
He's not Mike. I'm Joe.
And we got one more episode to record tonight.
Pray for us, fam. Bye.